All right. Welcome to Halitics on Friday. It's the free for all. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and I want to talk to you today. Give me a call 240-283-7262. The lines are open. I loved talking yesterday to our great comics, Lizzie and Felicia, and you should check out that program if you haven't already done so. The tickets for their show on Thursday, September 14th can be obtained, those ducats, by clicking the link either in yesterday's show or today. I replayed it again today because I thought you'd be interested. It looks like a great number of talented comedians, and one comedian will be on the stage there at the West Side Comedy Club in Manhattan on Thursday, September 14th. Now, I realized after the program that the 14th is a Thursday. When I told Lizzie and Felicia I would be available to go to the program, I thought it was going to be on a Saturday. I'm still going to make an effort. Can't promise you I'll be there. It is the free-for-all Halitics. That means you call in. And as much as I loved talking to the two women yesterday on some great topics, my love is chatting with you directly. I really, really want to talk to you. I think we have to come to solutions to the problems that we face as a society. They're existential in nature, and we'll get into that a little bit more towards the end of the program, how those who are privileged, such as myself, or who are super, ultra, uber privileged, like the billionaires, I believe she is indeed a billionaire, Leah Hunt Hendricks. How can we make the change that we need? What are our obligations? What is your obligation? 240-363-7190. I do want to chat with you. One thing that I think has gotten me in some trouble with the progressive movement, at least with some members of the progressive movement here in Maryland, and probably with you as well, perhaps, is that I'm not always the biggest embracer of what some call identity politics or cultural issues. I tend to be a guy who believes we need to talk first and foremost about economic justice rather than other issues involving justice, such as, even as bad as police killings are, and they're very, very bad, I think they are secondary to, they result from, in large part, the unequal, obscenely unequal distribution of wealth in this country. It's not the only reason for it, of course, but the various factors that will cause police to pull the trigger, one of those is, without question, in my view, the fact that some people in the society have everything and others have nothing at all. So I think that's what we have to address. I wanted to talk about a police shooting in Baltimore County on today's show. It was very interesting. I was reading the paper, and when you first read the Baltimore Sun, which kudos to the Sun, they did a great job covering this. I'm very, very pleased. I actually am a subscriber online to the Sun. Being a Maryland resident, I feel I need to have the paper of record in this state at my fingertips whenever I'm reading online. And of course, I get the Post at times, and also your Monterey Herald. I have continued that subscription as well. So those are the papers that I do pay for at this point. I get a great deal with the Herald. I have to say, it's so cheap. That's really the main reason. If I was going to otherwise subscribe to I don't know what I would do, because the California papers I'm not thrilled with. But the Sun does a really, really nice job. So this article relates how the victim in a police shooting, Brian Roger McCory, 37, who was killed by police officer Trenery in the Baltimore County area. I don't think it's Towson, Royal Farms Park. Yeah, in White Marsh, which is, if you've taken 95 north from D.C. through Baltimore, you get to White Marsh, and it's basically just a giant, shopping area with lots and lots of chain stores. It's not a real attractive area, unfortunately. They didn't do a very good job with it, I don't believe. So they're looking for this guy, McCory. He was shot while unarmed during an attempted arrest back on January 31st. And the reason it's in the paper now is because just yesterday, the Maryland Attorney General's office, which had investigated that shooting, concluded that McCoury, when he was shot, did not pose a danger to anyone in that moment. And he was also unarmed. Now, no one claimed when he was shot or in the aftermath that he was shot that he had been armed. So there was no allegation. The police said that we saw a weapon, we had to kill him, we had to shoot him, we had a weapon, he was dangerous. So when you read this, though, my first thought, I don't know if yours, my first thought is this is not a legitimate legal killing. This is an execution. The man was unarmed. He was not a danger. In other words, no one was in the path of his car when he was shot and killed. This is a detective, Jonathan Trenery, who should be prosecuted for doing so. But that's not what's going to happen. That is not what the Baltimore County attorney, state's attorneys, the attorney general said he wasn't a danger. There's no defense of self or others that would have justified, at least the facts don't show defense of self or others as the factual predicate underlying the killing, the shooting. So I read that, I'm like, okay, well, there needs to be a prosecution. Then you don't get to just execute people. Remember there was a case in Chicago some time ago where a man was walking sort of towards Chicago police, CPD, and he did not actually go towards them. And they said they were in fear for their life, and then he walked past them and they shot him. And it was ugly. It was outrageous. This shocked the conscience. And yet nothing was done. The officer was not, I don't even think he was admonished. So I read this and I'm thinking, and that was a terrible, terrible killing. And I read this story, I thought, well, this is, I guess, somewhat similar. And then I read that Baltimore County state's attorney, Scott Schellenberger, is not going to pursue the charges. They've already announced. They announced this in July without even waiting for the report from the state. They said, we're not going to prosecute this guy. No charges are being pursued. It's interesting because Maryland state law has been changed to make it a little bit easier to charge officers. And going forward, the Attorney General's office, not state's attorney. And remember, the Baltimore County State's Attorney do have a relationship with these cops because they have to prosecute cases that are brought to them by the police force. So there's they have a working relationship, which often makes it very, very challenging. I was a prosecutor in Washington, D.C., and I worked with detectives. And, I became friends with them. I wasn't going to want to ever charge them with any crimes. Usually what there is an internal affairs division and a special branch of the prosecutor's office that deals with, rogue cops, bad cops. I don't know whether the Baltimore County has that. D.C. had an internal affairs division, which was very, very much kept separate and out of all sorts of chains of command, so that the officers and detectives in the IAD were not ever subject, or to try to prevent them from being pressured by the rest of the force or by the U.S. Attorney's Office that prosecuted in D.C. In the state of Maryland, going forward, to avoid that very problem where prosecutors don't want to go after cops, and where cops don't want to arrest their brothers and sisters in uniform, the state's attorney will be the one to make that decision. But they aren't there yet. That'll happen in the fall when the responsibility for investigating police shootings will be switched to the state's attorney. And I think it's a good call. The attorney general, not the state. Yeah, the attorney general in our capital, Annapolis, will in the future be investigating. Right now, the state's attorney does it in the different counties. It's very confusing. It's certainly confusing to me. By the way, if you want to join me, 240-363-7190. Don't forget, click like and click subscribe. That's what I really, really, really need you to do. Click like, click subscribe. Especially that subscription. I've said that I want 1,000 by the end of the year, and it's going to require a lot of new subscribers, but I'm still optimistic we get there. So please do click like, subscribe. So Scott Schellenberger is a more conservative Democrat. I believe when you run for state's attorney, you do run, it's a partisan office, so you run as a member of a party, and he is a Democrat, just as pretty much all elected politicians are in Baltimore County. Not all, but most, the great majority. He is a Democrat, but he is a more conservative Democrat. He was challenged by a much more progressive candidate who I supported, and he lost. But I note that Schellenberger was criticized repeatedly for being too close to the police, for being too unwilling to charge cops with crimes, for overlooking police shootings. And this case sure seems to fit that exact, that exact fact pattern, where a cop fires his weapon, discharges it, kills a suspect. Remember, he hadn't been convicted of any at this point. A suspect is killed, an unarmed suspect who was not, according to the Attorney General of the state, a threat to that officer or any other. This looks really, really bad. But not so fast. If you go into the details, I'm not saying I'm persuaded it was an okay shooting. I'm not going to go that far. But what I'm going to say is it's not easy. These aren't always easy cases. And it turns out this really isn't one of those easy cases. This is one where I get the decision not to prosecute. And not only that, I think ultimately, if you're not certain, when in doubt, this was a lesson I learned when I was, running the radio station. When in doubt, don't. If you're considering a course of action, but you're not certain it's the right thing to do, maybe you don't do it. And that's where I think, in this case, discretion was the better part of valor. Now, if more facts come out, I guess they can revisit it. I'm not saying this cop shouldn't be disciplined, admonished. But why then? Why? If he shoots an unarmed man who wasn't, according to the final investigation, a risk, a threat, why in the moment, why then could this possibly have been an all right shooting? So let's go through this. So before the shooting, detectives were searching for McCory, the victim, on some outstanding warrants. It wasn't just one. He was involved in, or they suspected him of being involved in 2 shootings. In one shooting back nearly a year ago, December 23rd in Essex, Maryland, which is close to Baltimore, the person shot identified McCory as one of the shooters. 6 days later, in a, quote, road rage incident, unquote, also in Essex, McCory was accused of shooting at a man and his daughter. So this is a guy that the police, when they are dispatched to arrest, or when they're searching for him, have legitimate reason to be concerned he is a risk. He is dangerous. He was involved, allegedly, with, at least according to the Sun's reportage, credibly alleged to have been involved in 2 shootings, including in one where he shot a man in the ass and then shot a man at a man and his daughter. This is not somebody that you want to mess around with or take risks when you're attempting to arrest him, assuming those are credible charges. And what happened when the shooting occurred? So let's get into this. And the reason I think it's really important is we can't, too often in society today, we are so ready to take sides, one side or the other. Police are good, police are bad. And so often there's shades of gray. We just can't be so partisan. Police officer, detective in this case, shoots an unarmed man who was not, according to the Attorney General of the state, was not in that moment a danger to life. How can that possibly be okay? And the answer is, maybe it can be. When they observed McCory, or the man they believed was McCory, at a Royal Farms, which is sort of like a 7-Eleven, they recognized he was potentially dangerous, potentially armed. The police boxed him in. They put cars all around him. When he saw the police, and he was with a woman who was also being sought, by the way. The two of them were both being sought, or at least the police believed they were the two people being sought, and it turns out they were. When the two suspects saw that they were being surrounded by police, they didn't exit the vehicle, they didn't put their arms in the air, they didn't sit quietly and wait. The alleged shooter drove his car forward, smashing into the sedan of a detective who was standing at his driver's side door with his gun drawn. Then he backed the Kia towards another officer who was standing behind the car. And then he started driving into the car that was boxing him in one of them, managing to free the car, and he began to drive away. So he was in the process of escaping. At that point, the officer, the detective, shot him and killed him. Still sounds sketchy to me. This is somebody that he's a risk. He could kill somebody else. Or he could kill somebody. He wasn't wanted for murder. He was wanted for shooting one person and then for shooting at a father and daughter. He could kill somebody. He's clearly someone who's demonstrated that they have the ability to kill someone. The officer shoots him. The detective shoots him and he's dead. Still wondering, why not bring this to a grand jury? Why not indict him? What would be the justification for not indicting him? And in the end, and I don't have the actual article section, but the reason that they determined they weren't going to shoot him is because he had been violent with his vehicle. There were officers standing around. And because even though Trenery, the detective, said, or even though Trenery was ultimately found not to be in harm's way, they could not state definitively that he did not reasonably fear for his life or for that of one of the fellow officers on the scene. And that seems reasonable. The police are standing around their cars. This is a guy who, rather than get out of the car, starts smashing his way out of the roadblock and had previously been identified as the shooter in two separate incidents. So I bring this up because we are so quick often, on both sides, to either take the side of police or to determine that the police must be wrong, and often to act on imperfect information, to often react on imperfect information. This is just not clear cut. This is not clear cut. And unless there's more evidence, I think it's defensible. It's justifiable not to prosecute him. All right, you're listening to Halitics, 240-363-7190. I think we've got, we've got a caller from Monterey. I think it may well be John. John, I'm hearing a little background noise if that's you, but I think it's your number. John, how you doing this morning? Or afternoon?
Well, it's Tim, actually.
Hey, Tim. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to do that. I've seen that number. Tim, good to hear from you. How you doing? You good?
Pretty good. Hey, just real quick, I don't have much time, but I just wanted to say it really bothers me, a lot of the incidents where cops kill people, and I think their standard for engagement is just way too low. You know, I was in the military. I think you know that. And, you know, for the standards for us to engage is way higher than cops. And that's in a combat environment against people who are known enemies.
So you're saying in the military, you are not the rules of engagement.
Yeah, the rules of engagement are much higher. You have to know that they are. I mean, you have to be fired upon. You have to know that you are in imminent danger.
Well, I'm going to push back on that, Tim, because the military uses drones and often, very frequently, kills innocent people with them.
Well, no, you're absolutely correct on that. But those are, you know, offensive operations. But like, say if you are, I forgot all my terms now. But like, if you're out on patrol and you're moving to an engagement or something, you can, I mean, don't get me wrong. They are, you know, a lot of military members often get away with stuff they shouldn't either, but you can easily get in a lot of trouble for an engagement if you weren't being fired upon.
That's interesting. Well, thank you for that. What's your thought on this particular case that I'm describing right now?
I'm sorry, I kind of got into it late.
Oh, okay. Okay, just super quick.
So I don't know everything.
Super quick. So I just was saying, when I read about this story, when I read this in the Baltimore Sun, my first thought it was a bad shooting. The victim, who was killed by one shot from a detective, was not armed, and ultimately an investigation by the Maryland State Attorney General concluded that the victim did not pose in the moment a danger to human life or health. So my first thought is this has to be a bad shooting. But if you go through the article closely, what you find out is that the victim was wanted for two separate shootings, one where he had shot a man in the buttocks, another where he had shot at a man and his daughter. That's why he was being sought. He also had a potential accomplice who was with him in the moment. The police observed him at a convenience store. They boxed him in with their cars, exited their vehicles. When he saw this, he started ramming his car at the other vehicles to get out, by ramming his vehicle to extricate his vehicle, and started to drive away, at which point the detective shot him once in the neck and killed him. The Attorney General, after reviewing all the footage, they had some camera footage, but not from the officers themselves, but I guess from the convenience store, concluded that there was nobody in the path of the vehicle. But the state's attorney had previously concluded there would not be an arraignment, there would not be an indictment, because he believed the officer's story and believed it was reasonable that the officer had a legitimate fear for his safety or the safety of other officers who were standing in the area, based on the suspect victim's driving into other cars, and also based on his history as being wanted for police shooting, for shooting at others. And I would note that if that suspect had gotten away, he might well have killed somebody else.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's complicated when you've got a suspect with a history like that. But I think police put themselves into situations they should not be putting themselves into, like boxing him in if they know that he's a dangerous person. They are trained in tactics like time distance cover, and they often ignore their training and do things they shouldn't. And like I said, they also know that all they have to say is, "I feared for my life," or "I feel dangerous," and they get away with it. I mean, think back to like Philando Castile. They asked him if he had a firearm on him, and he said he was licensed. All he said was he's licensed, and he got shot on the spot. And they always say that. I thought he was going for a gun, and it turns out people don't have a gun. Like there was a gentleman in Sacramento who he was running from them, but he would just grab his cell phone and they shot him in his backyard. I mean,
there are a lot of really bad police shootings, and they should be prosecuted. I was just making the point that in this case, it's complicated, as you said, and I think it is very frequently have to be open-minded when we go into the.
I
these
think their
situations.
training standards should be much higher, especially as much as we pay them. I think the training standards should be higher. I think
that's a great point.
Be higher, and I think they should be held to a higher standard.
Well, you bring up the salary, and I don't know what Baltimore County Police are making, but I have a nephew who works as a deputy sheriff in Santa Clara County, and my understanding is he took home over $250,000, or his pay was over $250,000 last year because of overtime.
Yeah. In fact, I have a friend. I haven't talked to her in a long time, but we were in the National Guard together, and I watched one of those First Amendment audit guys the other day, and it was funny because I watched it because I saw her on it immediately. She's a deputy in Santa Clara, and he shows their salaries, and her total benefit package for the previous year was like $350,000.
It's amazing. I mean, yes, and this is really where I go, and because they're kind of a Praetorian Guard for the elites, right? I mean, they're there to protect the property of the billionaire elites, and they're well paid for that. And the concerns of, that does, whether you shoot an innocent person who isn't rich, they don't care. As long as my property is safe, as long as I'm safe, I don't care about, so this is why I go to our focus on the left really needs to be equality. We need to just eliminate these obscene wealth and income disparities, which I think are behind a lot of the shootings and certainly a lot of the violence in society today. I mean, police I think, legitimately have fear. I think that does happen. I think that's why when they say I was afraid, they get away with it a lot, because people can understand they'd be afraid. But we'd have a lot less violence. And we actually have less violence today than we did 30, 40 years ago in society. But we'd have far less if we just didn't have the poverty, if we didn't have the insecurity, if we didn't have such injustice in the way we treat people.
Okay. All right, I've got to run.
All right, great to chat. Thanks. That's Tim in Seaside, I believe. At least that's where he lived when I knew him personally, and he just confirmed it is Seaside. Thanks so much, Tim. We'll talk to him again soon. And I want to talk to you, 240-363-7190. I'm going to move on to another story, another topic, also from Maryland. This is from my county, Montgomery County, not Baltimore County, but Montgomery County. My wife's a public school teacher. I often talk about that. And our county is known for having great public schools. And I will say this, my sons, both of them, graduated from Montgomery County Public Schools. Shout out to BCC. They had a great education. They both loved high school. They had, and they learned an awful lot. I have zero beef with the education they received. But there's still big problems, big problems. Cover-ups, teachers not being given the respect they deserve, not having protection from predators in administration or from kids who may be dangerous. Here is a case where the MCPS, Montgomery County Public Schools, and the Board of Education, I believe, have just completely let down teachers. And so you can see it here. A principal, Joe Beetleman, has been alleged to have at least 18 counts of sexual harassment of teachers and other staffers. And teachers were going, the union representing teachers, the teachers as individuals, have been complaining for years about this principal. And he was instead feted. He was honored, not feted like smells really bad, F-E-T-I-D. I'm not saying he isn't feted, but he was feted. He was honored by the school district. He was considered a great principal. There was never action taken against him until finally at one point he was moved to another school. Kind of like the priests who molested kids would be moved from one parish to another rather than defrocked and referred to the police. So Beidelman here repeatedly was alleged to have harassed his charges, and the school system did nothing until when did they finally take action? They finally took action when the case made it, and this is what's always, I remember when I worked for the Washington, D.C. Corporation Counsel's office, you never want to be on the front page of the Washington Post. That was the biggest fear. Don't do anything that can get you on the front page of the Washington Post and of course the supervisors were afraid because that would make them look bad. So finally action was taken when this case made it to the front page of the Washington Post. 18 sexual harassment reports filed by school staff against him in only 12 years. So it wasn't, not that it would have mattered if it had been a 30-year tenure. It still would have been awful. But this guy was harassing 1.5 times a year in terms of having reports brought against him. And he had ramped up his harassment with 6 in 2023. So all that time, he's still in office. Nothing happened. In fact, he was being promoted. He was about to be promoted to a high school principal from middle school. The reason it's a promotion is probably because there's a lot more people in the high school, so they pay you a little more. And only because of the Post's inquiries was he placed on extended administrative leave. Now, the school cannot claim we didn't know about it because there had been all these reports filed. And the union had gone to the superintendent of schools, and she did nothing until the Post. There was no investigation. There was no referral to the police. There was no either termination or some kind of leave until this could be fully vetted. Nothing. He was going to be made principal of a high school. That makes it all this. I guess that makes it okay. I don't know if you can. So only the Post's reportage brought this principal to now being on leave, and I assume he's being paid. So now, with the school district under fire, justifiably so, for its awful handling of this, their response is to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of county taxpayer money, on some kind of independent investigation, quote, independent investigation. And we are all really concerned. I, as a taxpayer, my wife as a taxpayer, and as a teacher, and the school, the school district's staffers are clearly anticipating a cover-up. Who's doing the investigation? I would think you'd hire an investigator. I don't think you need to hire a law firm. And I would have asked, frankly, Montgomery County Police to do the investigation, or the sheriff's office to do the investigation. They're independent. They're not in the same line as the school board. And they're county employees. They get paid by the county. Why do you need to hire a private for-profit law firm to conduct the investigation? Well, you would do that, right? Why would you do that? You would do that if you didn't want the investigation to turn up any kind of whitewashing, any kind of cover-up, any kind of failings on your part. If you're the law firm of Jackson Lewis, which has an existing relationship with the school district, with the school board, you're not going to want to bite that hand that's feeding you. You're going to want to do what the people who signed on the dotted line want. And you know exactly what they want. They want you to find that you never really had any kind of convincing or credible claims that this guy was such a bad apple, that there were a few sort of minor, he brushed up against me. I really wasn't sure whether it was harassment or not. And you're going to want that a few lower level people didn't bring it to the attention of the superintendent. You're going to want to find that some of the people who are accusing Beitelman maybe aren't the most savory people. That's what you're going to want. You're not going to want a truly independent investigation that might turn up, a wholesale corruption within the school district. All Democratic County. I mean, we just cannot, for whatever reason, we cannot. Now, one factor, I believe the superintendent of public schools in Montgomery County, and I always go back to equality. I believe she's paid well over $300,000 a year. Now, if she was working, if she was the CEO of a company that had as big a staff as Montgomery County Public Schools, which I think is well over thousands of employees. She might be making millions. But hell, $350,000, that ain't bad. It's not bad. I never been close to that. It's not bad. She's going to want to keep that job. If we had equality, when I say equality, the top paid people make 15, 20 times more than the average worker, and nobody's hungry. Everyone has health care. There isn't insecurity. If we were in that place, I think there'd be less of this corruption. I really do. Because it wouldn't net you that much. But now, my God, the costs of getting a finding against you that you were responsible for this, you could lose everything. And you could lose your security. But if everyone was secure, okay, you probably would be more willing to just either bite the bullet or in the first place, not try to cover it up at the beginning. All right, join me, 240-363-7190. It is the free-for-all. Now, we're going to get to one more topic in just a moment. I don't want to leave the Montgomery County Public Schools yet. There's a little more juice in that lemon to be squeezed. So the firm I mentioned has a existing relationship with the school system, so they can't be relied on, in my view, to be independent, because they're going to want to please their client. Their client is Montgomery County Public Schools, the Board of Education, who writes them checks. Their client is not the teachers. But not only that, not only do they have a personal interest in concluding that Montgomery County Public School System didn't do anything wrong. The Board of Education, didn't hire an incompetent. Not only do they have that interest, but they also have chosen this firm. The firm is an anti-worker law firm. Their entire history is to help institutions, employers, and those charged with sexual harassment defeat those claims, overcome them, beat them. Now, I'm not saying they should hire a firm that represents victims. I'm not saying they should hire a plaintiff's bar firm that sues employers, seeks millions of dollars in damages. I'm not saying that's who they should hire. I'm saying they should hire a truly independent investigator that just investigates law breaking and harassment, period, without a tendency towards one side or the other. Clearly, this is a real travesty. It's a real sham, and we're all victims of this because we cannot believe there's going to be a truly independent, just outcome for the victims of this guy or for him either. If he is somehow exonerated, which I can't see happening, I think we'll all be very legitimately suspicious that it wasn't legitimate. It was rigged. So this is just really, really bad stuff. It's just what our institutions cannot be counted on in any way. All right, let's move on. One last story. I want to thank my mom for bringing this to my attention. This was in the New Yorker magazine, which I haven't really been reading so much. I kind of find the New Yorker, it's like all the elite institutions. It simply isn't able, I don't believe, can quite grapple with what life is like for the 99, how unjust life is. I mean, people who write for the New Yorker are generally the best writers, among the best writers, the best. It's really the coup you get to write for the New Yorker, and they're not. They're not emblematic of. They're not from. With very rare exception, from poor, struggling, and working class background. And if they are from that background, they're not in the poor, struggling, and working class anymore. So the question, now I know Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote for the New Yorker. I think he had a few articles in there. So I guess that's kind of a counter argument. But then again, Coates is certainly elite when it comes to educational background. And his articles do not really challenge the system that we live in today in terms of wealth and income distribution, but he's more focused on racism than he is on inequality. So here it is, which is a concern, of course, of elites. There's always this guilt. Well, I have what I have because I'm white, or we need to focus on racism and racial disparities, not on truly equal distribution of wealth, because it's a lot more vague how we will be at a society that has eliminated racism. And even if we do get rid of inequity, that doesn't mean I don't get to have, many millions of dollars and live really, really well while others live shabbily. It just means that at my kid's school, there's some more faces of color. So here we have the New Yorker doing a nice profile. Andrew Marantz, I wonder if he's from the Marantz audio family. I'm not familiar with the name Marantz. Remember they used to be those stereos, Marantz? Well, if so, I guess he's probably wealthy too. What should you do with an oil fortune? And I think this is so interesting, the way they frame this article about Leah Hunt Hendricks and what she's doing. She's a scion of this movement. H.L. Hunt, once the richest man in America back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, from oil. So what is she doing to make things better in America? And, I want to just say on a very, very small scale, that was sort of something I questioned what I should do. And back in the early 2000s when I ultimately got into media and radio, and I made a decision, obviously on whatever billions, hundreds of millions of dollars, but I had enough that I was able to, with investors, buy a radio station. I was very pleased I got to do that and hopefully make a difference in the end. I question if that was the best use, the most effective use of my money. Probably would have been better at that point to really push for this live stream, right? Really try to build it up and build influence that way. But I think at the time I made the decision, it was the right decision. So here's Ms. Hunt Hendricks. They have a nice profile picture of her, and I thought it was such a nice photo. I really did want to share it as well, and get a vibe for, face. What do they say? A picture tells 1,000 words and all that. So she is somebody who is determined, I think, to use her wealth to make a difference, to make things better. And I honor that, I really do. So there's Ms. Hunt Hendricks, Leah Hunt Hendricks. And the article kind of really gets into her thinking about this and why she did what she did. And, it opens with this interesting question. What would you do if you had great wealth? Which I certainly wasn't. But I find it so interesting that a major part of this article is that Leah Hunt Hendricks, that her motivation comes in large part from the fact that her wealth came from recently, right? She's not like a Rothschild whose family wealth, dates back to the 18th century. But from the early to mid 20th century, and from fossil fuels. So the focus starts out with, let's say you were born to a legacy that you have come to believe is ruining the world. What can you do? Give it away or do something else. And I find it so fascinating that the opening paragraph, the opening sentence, focus is on the source of the money is so relevant that it really matters. Because I don't think it matters at all. I don't think it matters where you got your money. I don't think it would have mattered if she, her grandfather or her grandmother or if they had, lotteries, come up with the most innocuous or least evil source of wealth, right? Say every great fortune, behind every great fortune is a great crime. That's actually quoted in this article. But I don't know why that matters. You have the money. Don't you have a duty, whether that money came from winning a lottery or from representing poor people in legitimate class action lawsuits, like your, what was that movie? Aaron Brockovich. So you had somehow parlayed some really just lawsuits into billions of dollars? Does that really matter? Or is it just the fact that you live in society, you have a duty to try to make life better for other people? To me, that's what matters. So I am so curious about the choice by this author, Marantz. And maybe it's what Hendricks told him. Maybe it's what Hunt Hendricks or whatever it is told him, what she told him. Maybe she said, well, I felt guilty because my money came from oil. I don't know. But to me, it doesn't matter. As I mentioned, I have a little bit of privilege. It doesn't matter to me where that money came from. I don't believe there was any crime behind it. I don't have any embarrassment about it. It's just, if I can do something, I have a duty to do it. In a profoundly unequal, unjust world, a world of empire, a world where we're possibly, very probably past the point of no return when it comes to the climate catastrophe, to the new Holocaust, well, I don't see why it matters that her granddad's money or her great-granddad's money came from fossil fuels any more than it would matter if it came from anything else. But the New Yorker focuses on that source, right? That it came from fossil fuels. And I think one reason, because their readership are a bunch of multimillionaires and more. And the author and the publisher don't want their readers to be too uncomfortable. They'll go, oh my God, well, if Hunt Hendricks is doing something, so must I. It's easy. You can distance yourself. Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm a corporate lawyer. I'm not really doing anything bad, which you probably are if you're a corporate lawyer. But, it's not like I'm a billionaire. I'm just doing the best I can, so I don't really have to do anything. I think that's what is a very large, and I'm not saying they necessarily consciously made that decision, but they don't want to make their readers feel too uncomfortable or too bound to address the unfolding cataclysm. So here is they go through this. What are some of the things that you can do? So you could give it all away, but that might make people close to you uncomfortable, right? Because if you give it all away right now, you're going to be poor, possibly. And that won't really change. It'll make people around you uncomfortable. It won't really change anything. And if you think the world is being ruined by structural causes, which I certainly think, look, the structural causes are in large part, the fault lies in ourselves, not our stars. But, people are selfish and greedy. But we can create structures. We can create a system where our more negative traits we are incentivized to use those traits for less harmful, destructive causes, or to minimize them, right? And a good way is, again, if you largely eliminate inequality, not completely, you can never completely, but you largely eliminate inequality, then even if you're greedy and selfish, it won't reward you by that much. And to the extent you are able to create wealth, others will benefit from it. If you tax fossil fuels so that they're so expensive nobody's going to buy them, well, there's no incentive to producing fossil fuels or to burning them. So again, if you give away your money, or and this is something that I think is really interesting when Jeff always says to me, oh, you always want to raise taxes, but you don't really pay for it yourself. And I'm like, well, I would pay higher taxes, so that's ridiculous. But I'm not going to give away all my money for several reasons. One, it'll make me really uncomfortable. And two, it won't change anything. It's not going to change the current structure. So what do you do? And as you know, I thought about buying a radio station and did that. You keep going through the article and you see again the focus on the source of the wealth as being very material to the decision to take action rather than being kind of irrelevant. You have the money, do something about it. So the author notes what I already said, and I guess I got it from behind every great fortune is a great crime. But because Hunt Hendricks's wealth came from, a time which is within some people's lifetime, within our memory, our recollection, some of us, she feels perhaps a special duty. And I accept that. I honor that. I just don't think in the end it matters if you're fortunate enough, if you're privileged enough that you maybe can really make a difference based on your wealth, I don't think it matters where the money came from. You still have a duty to do what you can to try to save the planet. So she did a lot of things. She went to Duke. She's very smart, obviously. Well, I'm just going to assume if you go to Duke. I shouldn't assume that. Maybe it was a legacy admission. Maybe she's not that bright, but I'm going to assume that if you go to that elite university, you're intelligent. Maybe that's a bad assumption. And she thought of a lot of things to do. I think it's really interesting. These are, I guess what different people think of when they have this kind of money. I certainly didn't or couldn't have, but she's saying her duty is to rectify imbalance of wealth and power. What could she do? Endow a professorship, work at a soup kitchen, and then this kind of mentor of hers, Howard Waz, says she wanted to do the grown-up thing, to look at all of it square in the face and try to find a way to make herself useful. I guess that means to change society. Well, I don't think is that so difficult. I mean, I think we all, I don't know that. I'm not so impressed with that particular statement, but I am impressed very much with Hunt Hendricks. And I was fascinated to read that she actually studied with my choice for president, Dr. Cornel West. I really did. And I was thinking, well, there's your answer. You've got to make political change. Is there any other way besides political change? I'm not aware of it. So two of her main advisors, one was Cornel West, and then this other guy, Jeffrey Stout. I must confess, I don't know who Stout is. Maybe I need to realize. But if Cornel West, Dr. West, was one of her mentors, then wouldn't you assume that the solution is to elect him president, right? I mean, that's where we were hoping she was going to go. They were going to go. And I saw, I searched for West in the article. That's the only place Cornel West is in this article. He's not mentioned again. But she does notice, she does take note of Jeffrey Stout's position, his theory that U.S. is a plutocracy. We're not a democracy. The rich and powerful get all the breaks and make the decisions for everyone else. And I guess she's kind of in that category of rich and powerful. So what's she going to do to change it? And she sees more and more around the world, very interesting stuff. She goes to the Middle East. I'm not going to show all the slides. We're coming towards the end of the hour. I don't want to spend too much time on this. But she goes to the Middle East. She sees activists who are fighting against fossil fuel extraction. She hears how terrible, and she goes to the West Bank. She sees just how bad Israeli persecution of Palestinians is, how much harm it's doing to the individuals there, who say to her, we don't even want your help, really, we want your solidarity. So she sees all this injustice all around the world. And what does she do? What does she do with it? Well, she basically becomes sort of I would say, a standard issue progressive activist. She gives to Black Lives Matter. She joins rallies for UPS workers, for a union. I put up here real quick. She donates to leftist social movement. She leverages her connections to persuade other rich people. And she raises money for left populist politicians. So, I mean, I guess that all sounds good. This is kind of a journey I think a lot of us have gone through. But the problem is, who are those politicians? Well, the Squad, Ro Khanna, I think Jayapal is mentioned as well in this article. And that's not going to do it. I'm not saying she was wrong to think it might help. I'm not saying she was wrong to try to rebuild the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party has demonstrated that it is far more capable of corrupting its most progressive members, or at least those who claim to be or who run as progressive. It's far more able to corrupt them than they are able to change it. So you got to come up with another plan, Hunt Hendricks. And I think it's clear what that plan. I mean, if you want to talk about Israeli occupation of the West Bank, there's been nothing done by the left to rein it in. There's been nothing done. Every single Democrat voted for Hakeem Jeffries, who has called Israel the sixth borough of New York. Not Manhattan, Manhattan's a borough. Sixth borough of New York City is Israel, according to Hakeem Jeffries. He just visited there. This Squad, every time any of them says anything that's even remotely sort of maybe critical of Israel a little bit, they pull it back. They all vote for unlimited funding. Jayapal is the poster child for pulling back on Medicare for all, not pushing it as an issue, not forcing the vote. Your plan, Hunt Hendricks, you got all that money. Here's what you can do. And I guess I'll just show this real quick because this was really kind of turned my stomach a little bit. I want to like Ro Khanna, but how does he see her? They're at a centimillionaire. Centimillionaire is $100 million. Because I don't know if she's a billionaire. I guess she's not. So they're at a centimillionaire holiday party, a progressive. He's a progressive centimillionaire. And who's there? Ro Khanna. I'm not saying you shouldn't ally with centimillionaires. What I'm saying is that change is not going to come about through Ro Khanna. That change isn't coming about through the squad. That change would, if there's going to be change in society, if things are going to get better, it's coming about through your mentor. So I say to you, Leah Hunt Hendricks, I believe you are sincere. I believe you want things to be better. It's the change that we need isn't coming about through the progressive Democratic left. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to support if you really want to, and I won't even say make amends for what your grandfather did.
I mean, how could it be you got 1% of the population on 90% of the wealth and there not be a major movement against grotesque wealth inequality? The three individuals have wealth from coming to the bottom, 50%, 160 million fellow citizens, not a major movement against wealth inequality. Well, there's got to be a way in which there's both an awakening and a reckoning of this. So people can begin to see what's going on, feel more deeply the hurt, and then believe something can be done about it.
That's going to do it for today's program. Please do support Dr. West. I'll be back Monday. Have a great weekend.